Hi everyone, these days not just in America, but all over the world, there's only one hot topic, the future of the dollar. And listen carefully, what I'm about to tell you might just shake you up. The BRICS countries, they're playing their own game now. The dollar's throne is shaking, and if that throne falls, the entire calculation of world trade will change overnight. Let's get straight into it. For decades, the US dollar has been the king of global trade. Oil deals, international loans, big import-export payments, most of them happen in dollars. Why? Because the world trusted the US economy and its stability. But now, that trust is shaking. For the first time, big American economists and financial experts are openly saying the era of dollar dominance may be coming to an end. And this is not some conspiracy from outside. These warnings are coming from inside America itself. The problem is, countries are getting tired of depending only on one currency. They've seen how, in global politics, the US can use the dollar as a weapon, freezing assets, cutting off banking access, and putting sanctions whenever it wants. And after what happened with Russia, many nations are thinking, what if tomorrow this happens to us? That's why today, the dollar is facing challenges from all directions. New alliances are forming, trade agreements are changing, and countries are quietly preparing for a world where the US dollar is not the only option. The most serious challenge to the dollar today is coming from BRICS. Together they hold massive resources, huge populations, and a growing share of global trade. Brazil's president has openly said, relying on the US dollar for international trade is not sustainable. He wants to test a new BRICS currency for settling payments. India hasn't made such a bold statement yet, but is quietly observing the situation. And there's a reason for this caution. Both India and Brazil have faced steep US tariffs in recent years, which shows how quickly trade policies can turn. This push from BRICS is not just an economic step, it's also political. By reducing dollar dependence, these nations aim to protect themselves from sanctions, asset freezes, and sudden policy shifts from Washington. Globally, reactions are mixed. Some welcome the move as healthy competition, others fear it could destabilize the financial system. The US dollar has been the main currency for world trade for decades. But this dominance also gives the US enormous control, from imposing sanctions to freezing foreign reserves. Recent events like the freezing of Russia's assets have made many countries nervous about keeping too much of their wealth in dollars. Nations like India and Brazil, which hold large dollar reserves, now worry about what could happen if political tensions rise. This is why more countries are starting to discuss alternatives, aiming to reduce dependence on a single currency and protect their economies from sudden shocks. BRICS countries have one thing in common. They want more control over their own trade and finances. Brazil's president has openly called for a BRICS currency to reduce dependence on the dollar, while India is keeping a careful watch without making bold statements. These nations see dollar dominance as a risk, especially after recent examples of asset freezes and sanctions. If BRICS starts trading more in local currencies or a new joint currency, it could slowly reduce demand for the US dollar. This might weaken America's economic influence, shift trade balances, and even create a more multipolar global financial system. For the US, it means losing one of its biggest strategic advantages. For others, it's a chance for greater independence. Well-known global economists like Jeffrey Sachs have been openly criticized of America's approach to economic dominance. Sachs warns that the US often uses the dollar not just as a currency, but as a political weapon, imposing sanctions, freezing reserves, and making sudden trade decisions without considering long-term consequences. He believes this unpredictability pushes countries to search for alternatives. He has also advised nations like India to avoid overdependence on the US as a trade and reserve partner. According to Sachs, leaders like President Donald Trump made impulsive and short-sighted decisions, such as sudden tariffs or foreign policy shifts, which can put allies at risk. His core message is clear. In today's world, too much reliance on the dollar could turn into a serious vulnerability for many countries. Both India and Brazil hold massive foreign exchange reserves, and a large part of these are invested in US dollar assets and treasury bills. India's reserves are nearing $700 billion, while Brazil's are close to $400 billion. On paper, this seems safe, but the real risk comes if the US decides to freeze or dishonor these holdings, as it did with Russia during the Ukraine conflict. Such a move, even if unlikely, could cause huge financial losses overnight. Economists warn that with unpredictable global politics, no country can fully rule out this possibility. That's why experts suggest diversifying reserves into other currencies, gold, and strategic assets, to reduce the danger of being overly dependent on US treasuries. A growing number of American experts believe that the US dollar strength is actually a double-edged sword. While a strong dollar shows economic confidence, It also makes US goods more expensive in global markets, reducing competitiveness. That's why some US leaders, including Donald Trump in the past, have openly preferred a weaker dollar, thinking it could boost exports and attract more tourism. If the dollar loses value, American products could become cheaper abroad, helping exporters. But for countries holding large reserves in dollars, such devaluation means their savings lose value instantly. This is why the idea of a death of the dollar is often less about total collapse and more about a major, possibly deliberate, reduction in its value for economic advantage. Both India and Brazil understand the risks of overdependence on the US dollar, but their approaches are cautious. India continues to strengthen trade ties with multiple partners, decreasing buys US defense equipment, yet refuses to fully align with Washington's demands, like stopping oil imports from Russia or opening its agriculture sector. Brazil, on the other hand, is more vocal, actively supporting the idea of a BRICS currency to reduce dollar reliance. Both nations are exploring more trade in local currencies, diversifying reserves into gold and other assets, and forming regional trade agreements. These steps may be gradual, but they reflect a long-term strategy to safeguard their economies from sudden policy shifts in the US and to prepare for a world where the dollar may no longer dominate global trade. As concerns over dollar dominance grow, several alternatives are beginning to take shape. BRICS nations are exploring the idea of a shared currency for trade settlements, while some countries are increasing the use of their own local currencies in bilateral deals. For example, India paying Russia in rupees, or China and Brazil trading in yuan. Digital currencies issued by central banks, known as CBDCs, are also being tested as a future tool for international transactions. Gold is making a comeback too, with many nations increasing the reserves as a hedge against currency risks. None of these options may replace the dollar overnight, but together, they signal a slow shift towards a multi-currency global system. This could reduce the dollar's monopoly in trade and finance, creating a more balanced but also more complex economic order. It's clear now that the global monetary map is being redrawn. The US dollar, once untouchable, is facing competition from new currencies, local trade settlements, and even digital central bank currencies. For decades, the dollar's dominance meant stability for some, but vulnerability for others. Today, the choice before nations is simple: adapt, or risk being caught unprepared. For countries like India and Brazil, this is not about rejecting the dollar completely, but about creating a financial safety net. That means diversifying reserves across multiple currencies, increasing gold holdings, encouraging bilateral trade in local currencies, and strengthening regional trade blocs like BRICS. It also means investing in domestic manufacturing and exports so that we are not overly dependent on external markets controlled by one currency. Economic sovereignty is not just an economic term, it's national security in another form. The sooner we act, the stronger our position will be in a world that is clearly moving towards a multi-currency order. And in this changing global game, it's not the biggest player who wins, it's the smartest one who plans ahead. The winds of change in global finance are already blowing. The dollar's dominance may not end overnight, but its absolute control is no longer guaranteed. Countries that act early, diversifying reserves, building trade flexibility, and protecting their own currencies will have the power to decide their own economic future. In the coming years, the world will remember two types of nations: those who prepared for the new era and those who waited too long. The question is, which side will we be on? Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the world is really moving towards a multi-currency system, or will the US dollar maintain its top position for decades to come? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. Thank you for watching till the end. If you found this discussion useful, do like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more such deep, clear explanations on global issues.